Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're getting back into the device setup in Home Assistant and NodeRed, and we're going to be looking at the Nest family of products, primarily the Nest thermostat. We'll see the Nest Cam and the Nest Protect smoke detector as well, but we'll be focusing most on the thermostat. For those of you living under a rock, the Nest thermostat is Google's entry in the now popular world of smart home thermostats. It was one of the first home thermostats to leverage a powerful cloud backend for usage monitoring, eco-temperature suggestions, home away management, and predictive scheduling. It's pretty smart on its own, but the best part is Nest has an open API that can be used to interact with the cloud backend that's controlling the thermostat. This means that we can view the current status of the Nest products, read sensor data, and even control them to a certain degree. Now, I'm going to give a disclaimer. There are some things Nest does really well, but much like the consumer bridge for Lutra and Caseta, the Nest product family also has its share of compromises. In the Nest Cam and doorbell space, Nest pushes a subscription model to utilize some of the most desirable features of the product, including storage of recorded video, as local recording is not something these products can do. On top of that, the cameras in these devices are fairly unimpressive in terms of image quality. This is most likely by design to reduce bandwidth consumption to the cloud, but yet Nest charges a very premium price, each one coming in around $250 Canadian. In my opinion, there's better solutions for in-home surveillance out there that are a lot less limited in terms of features. Wisecam. But anyway, enough ranting. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to navigate to developers.nest.com. And you'll be brought to this page, and you're going to want to create a developer account with nest.com. Now I already have one, so when I click the sign up link, it's going to take me straight to my products page or my clients page. But obviously you're going to want to fill out the form. It's pretty straightforward. It'll give you a developer account, and it'll allow you to drop onto this client page here. Now I already have a client defined, but just for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to go through the process and create another one. So we're going to click Create New Zero Auth Client, and we're going to start by giving it a unique name. Now, a good unique name, as recommended by the Home Assistant tutorial page, is your own email address. I think that's perfectly reasonable. It should be unique right off the bat, but really you can name it whatever you want. So I'm going to name it. I might have to blur that little pop-up that came up there. I think it had some username, password information in it. Anyway, the description is I'm just going to say Nest client for home assistant. Okay. That also can be whatever you want. The support URL, I'm going to use my actual domain. If you have a domain, you should probably use it. If you have a public IP for your Nest system, you should use it, I would say. Or I'm not really 100% sure what level of verification they do on this, but if you've got a domain, if you've got a public IP, use it. If not, fill it in with garbage, and hopefully it works long term. The only thing that concerns me is that if they ever go to check these support URLs for mass closures of these accounts, I don't know how they're going to react if it's not a real site. Dataflow.com is my domain. The categories, again, this is for whatever you plan on using this integration for. So in my case, I'm going to choose home automation, and I'm actually just going to choose baby monitoring. I don't think either of them really matters. It's just as long as you have some kind of reason for this. The additional redirect URIs, we're going to leave that blank. The number of users, we're going to set that to individual. And now we get to permission setting. So we're going to be allowing Home Assistant to have, well, I'm going to be allowing Home Assistant to have really permissive use of my Nest products. You might have a different prerogative in regards to that, if security concerns, so you can set your permissions however you want. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I'll just start by telling you that I'm going to give Home Assistant pretty much free reign of these permissions. So if you copy mine, it should be, wide open for Home Assistant to do what it wants to do. So thermostat, I'm going to give it thermostat read write, and here it wants an explanation of what your application is going to use this portion of the API for. So I'm just going to use a can statement. I'm going to say Home Assistant to interact with Nest. And I think that's going to be acceptable. If I click done, that's fine. So energy read, I'll paste in the same thing. Camera, I'm going to say camera images read write. Interact with Nest. Secure smoke CO alarm, we'll give that read. Home system interact with Nest. Security, we'll give that state read. And other permissions. Here I'm going to give it away read write, so Home Assistant can set the Nest to away manually if it needs to. ETA, I'm going to give that read only. I don't think Home Assistant will ever be telling Nest when I'm coming home. That's probably going to be the other way around. And we'll give structure read write. And postal code read, I don't really see a purpose for that personally. So that's all the permissions I'm going to set. Like I said, they're pretty wide open. They're pretty, they're not exactly the most secure if you have any questions about the security of your Home Assistant system. So I'll leave that to your discretion what kind of permissions you set. It is self-explanatory what abilities it will give you. Anyway, so create that product. And now I've got a new client ID and a new client secret. So that is all we actually need for the Home Assistant portion of the setup. So let's get back to, we'll put this aside, and we will get back to the Home Assistant server and start editing configuration.yaml. So we'll go ahead and we'll open up configuration.yaml. And we'll scroll down, find a spot here right above Phillips 2, I guess. And we'll paste in this snippet. And this is straight from the Home Assistant Components Nest page that you'll be able to find on the Home Assistant site. It's just client ID and client secret. So this data is going to come directly from the Nest developer page. And it looks like when you highlight it, it automatically copies or something like that. Something fancy. We'll clear that and paste it in, and then we will also clear this and paste that and restart Home Assistant. Okay, so now if we navigate to our Home Assistant instance, we should be able to see the Nest is a part of it. Okay, so we see the Nest configurator here, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to click Request Authorization. We're going to use this, we're going to sign into our Nest account. Or actually, it's already signed into my Nest account for me, just because of Google Chrome's caching, and it's given me this PIN code. This PIN code I'm going to paste back into here, confirm, and there we go. Immediately you see all the sensor data is exposed that we gave it, that we gave the Home Assistant permission to see through this client. You can see motion detected, person detected. These are all coming from my Nest Cam, which is in my daughter's room. We see the temperature target and the actual temperature of my hallway on my Nest thermostat. We even see some Nest Protect online statuses here. Looks like we're going to be able to see my ETA home, or my wife's ETA home. Looks like it's coming from 2017, so I'm not 100% sure on that one. But anyway, a lot of the sensor data is here, and obviously we have access to the images coming from my Nest Cam, so that seems to have worked. Now let's check it out in NodeRed. Okay, so we'll navigate to NodeRed. And let's create a new flow tab. We'll call this one Climate. And its status is enabled. And done. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through a use case that I actually use in my own home automation system. I'll give you a little bit of background. My daughter's bedroom, I have a young 2-year-old daughter, and she sleeps in a bedroom that's on the opposite corner of the house from my furnace and HVAC system. So when the furnace and HVAC system is on, it seems to me at least that her room seems to be getting it doesn't respond as quickly to the HVAC system being on. So it's often very hot or very cold in that room. So what me and my wife have done is we picked up a blower fan, a grill style blower fan that kind of just sits inside the floor grill, and helps assist the HVAC system by pulling the air into her room. It's plugged into a wall socket that has a Wi-Fi enabled receptacle on there. Let me see. A Belkin Wemo is a good example of, like, this one's not a Belkin Wemo, but it's something a lot like one of these things here. So it's a regular Wi-Fi enabled receptacle, can be triggered on and off by Home Assistant or NodeRed. Nothing special about that. But what I want to set up here is I want to set it up so that instead of just running all the time, that this blower fan only turns on between a certain time period and only turns on when my HVAC system is actively trying to heat or cool the house. So we're going to step through a somewhat complex NodeRed automation to do that, and throughout that automation I'll kind of explain what I'm doing, and hopefully we can all learn a lot about some different nodes in NodeRed that we don't use so often. So I'll come back here and let's get started with that now. Okay, so let's start by getting some additional palette items. We're going to be looking for something called time range. There we go, time range switch, and that's separated by hyphens. So we'll install that, install, and we're going to look for another one called stop timer. There it is, install. Okay, now that we have those additional nodes set up, we can start working on our automation. What we're going to want to do to start is, remember, we want to turn the fan on when the system is operational, and we want to turn the fan off when the HVAC system is not doing anything. So there's a couple ways we can do that. We can take an event state change, and then whenever the event state changes from off to cooling, we can trigger a flow. That's a good option, but it doesn't account for times when maybe you restart your Home Assistant server while your HVAC is running. At that point, your Home Assistant, your NodeRed server and Home Assistant server will restart, but this particular flow won't catch a state change until the system either goes from running to off or from off to running. So if we restart it mid-cycle, we might miss out on some opportunity to run that fan. So we're not going to use the state change for this one in particular. I think for this automation, we should have set up a persistent poll where we poll the Nest API saying, hey, what state are you in, kind of over and over again, maybe once every 30 seconds. And here's how you do that. We'll drag an injection node out onto the pane, and we will set this injection node up for a repeat on an interval. And we'll set, I think 30 seconds will probably be appropriate for most people, but I'm going to set this up in a 10-second interval just for the purpose of the video, and we'll call this state polling. Okay, we'll say done to that. I'm going to set the debug window to the current flow so that we don't see any extra messages in there. So we're going to state poll, and it's going to just inject a timestamp. It really doesn't matter in this case what it injects, as long as it every 10 seconds puts a message into the flow to start the flow off. And then we're going to use the current state node. And inside the current state node, we're going to say Nest, we'll call it Nest operating state. And the entity ID is going to be sensor dot hallway, and we'll say HVAC state. So mine is called hallway thermostat. That's the name of my my actual device in Home Assistant. You can see that in the state tool. Yours will probably be different if you have a different name for your device, for your Nest thermostat and your Nest profile. But in my case, it's hallway thermostat, and the sensor we're looking for is HVAC state. So we're going to be pulling the HVAC state sensor. We'll say done to that. Let's set that up, and let's see what that looks like when we hook it up to a debug node. We'll deploy. Let's move this to the side. You can see I have my Nest thermostat panel here. This is just the normal Nest thermostat panel on nest.com. So let's query the state. Okay, so we've got an off message here. I'm going to go force my Nest to turn on. Okay, so I can hear my HVAC system turning on. This should turn blue. There we go. So now it is actively cooling the house. We'll pull the state again, and now we see the message says cooling. And these repeat messages are from the actual every 10-second, automatic polling, which is exactly what we want. Perfect. So we've got a very good test here. Let's turn the Nest off before I freeze, and we'll get back to building our flow. Nope, wrong one. So we see the nature of some of the messages in here. The three actual possibilities is it's going to say heating, cooling, or off. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pipe this into a switch node to determine what state actually is being run in terms of the flow. So we'll say heating and cooling and off. And these are all string type variables. We'll call it heating, cooling, off, just so we know what the node is doing. And from this switch node, once we determine if it's heating or cooling or off, we know that we want to turn the fan off when the state is off and turn the fan on when we're heating or cooling. But we're going to add one more step in here in between, because in my case, this is for a nursery, and my daughter only uses the nursery when she's in bed. So we're going to set a time range window that I only want any activities to be done between 7 p.m. and 8 a.m. So this new time range, this time range node that we installed earlier is going to come into use here. So I'm going to say the start time is going to be 1900, and the end time is going to be 0800, and that will give us that range between 7 p.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. We'll just call it 1900 to 0800. Done. Okay. And the action that we want to use for turning the fan on, like I said earlier, is going to be heating and cooling, which is the top two in this switch node. And now we get to the actual part where we turn on the fan. So this is going to be different for everyone depending on what kind of smart outlet you're using. I'm using one with custom firmware that just takes an HTTP request. So for me, the turn fan on is going to be a GET request to this IP. And yeah, that's all it is, on.html. So we'll say, give this a name called turn fan on. And I'll duplicate this, Control C, Control V, and we'll make a turn fan off node. And that's going to just go to off.html. Okay, so we know that anything during this time window is going to be turning the fan on. And when it's off, we want when the Nest operating state turns to off, we want to have that fan turn off. But I'm going to give it a little bit of a delay so that it can pull any remaining bits of hot or cold air from the system using that other node that we downloaded, the stop timer. And I'm just going to give it 1 more minute of running after the Nest turns off to finish its cycle of pulling more air. So we'll say 1 minute timer. After the Nest goes off, it starts the 1 minute timer and it turns the fan off. I should have relabeled this, shouldn't I? There we go. Now we have a little better idea of what's going on here. Okay, so that is actually all we need it to do. I'm trying to think if there's any fringe cases here that we're missing. I actually don't think so. I think this is going to be a working flow. So just take this as an example. This is a fairly specific use case, but we used a lot of really helpful nodes here in this automation that can be customized to a lot of different forms of climate-related automations. And we're going to go over some more in the future. I just wanted to give you a quick example here that's a little more complex than the examples I usually do. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Next video, we're going to be getting into notifications on your devices from your Home Assistant system, and even communicating back to your Home Assistant system from your mobile devices without having to necessarily open the web API. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.